This morning, a COVID vaccine is sooner than you think. We are one-on-one with the Health and Human Services Secretary, Alex Azar. The state is telling school districts, get kids back to class or risk losing state funding. Will that decision help or hurt Republicans in the suburbs? President Trump campaigning in Texas again, why his campaign is concerned about the state. And we'll talk to the Secretary of Energy about getting Texans back to work in the oil patch. And Congressman Michael Burgess making it easier for COVID survivors to help those still battling the virus.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
And good morning to you. We have something unusual today. 2 cabinet secretaries are on our program this morning. Let's start, though, by getting you caught up on political headlines happening across Texas. Texas is preparing for what could be record turnout in the November election, so Governor Abbott is extending early voting. You know, it usually runs 2 weeks. Abbott, though, is adding almost another entire week on top of it. Early voting now from October 13th to October 30th. If Texans vote with their pocketbooks, consider this. More than 3 million fellow Texans have filed for unemployment since March. The unemployment rate has almost tripled in our state year to year, and sales tax revenues, money that cities depend on, that is down as well. Add it all up, and it could have an effect on what happens this fall. And Congressman Louis Gohmert says he feels fine, but he has the coronavirus. Now some of his colleagues are in quarantine. Congresswoman Kay Granger from Fort Worth says she is self-quarantining after sitting next to Gohmert on a flight last week. Gohmert represents part of East Texas and is known, among other things, for refusing to wear a face mask. Our first guest this morning is a doctor in Congress, Michael Burgess, who we have seen wearing a face mask. Congressman Burgess is from Denton County, and that is part of his district as well, a 26th district in North Texas. Dr. Burgess is with us right now from Washington, D.C. Congressman, good to see you this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on. Great to be with you.
Let's start with the additional aid package that Congress is working on. The $600 weekly unemployment benefit is over. 3 million Texans have filed for unemployment since March. How long is it going to take to reach an agreement?
I don't have an answer for you because I don't understand why parties aren't at the table right now trying to work that out. That's the difficulty. You know, here's the sad part about this, Jason. All of the response bills to the viral pandemic, all of the response bills that have passed through have been bipartisan until we got to this one, and the mark put up by House Democratic leadership, clearly unacceptable to Senate Republican leadership, and that's been going on for a couple of months. Why we cannot meet in the middle, I cannot tell you.
Congressman, let me ask you this: why did it take Republicans so long to come up with another aid package?
Oh, I don't think that's quite the answer. Look, Leader McConnell's been pretty straightforward about this, that he also wants to see some type of certainty in the liability arena as businesses and schools open back up. I think that is correct. It doesn't need to be something that is permanent. It can be something that's temporary. But to this point, House Democrats will not even consider it, so that's been the problem.
I want to shift off now to talk a little bit more about the virus. Those people who are sick with COVID right now are sometimes being treated with blood plasma from COVID survivors. You're trying to help streamline that plasma process a little bit. Tell us how so.
Convalescent plasma is, it's an old technique. It's clearly well over 100 years old. It is one of the things that will work. And when we're talking about this whole new world of viral countermeasures and waiting on a vaccine, convalescent plasma is one of the tools at our disposal. Here's the good news: if you have had the virus and you have recovered from the virus, consider being a plasma donor, because there is a great need right now for the plasma from people who have recovered from a coronavirus infection. I put some additional money into this last appropriations bill that we just did and considered on the House floor this week to add to the overall appropriation for research into the extraction of plasma proteins from plasma donations. We probably could do a better job of that than we're doing right now. Well, again, the technique we're using was developed back in the 1930s.
Well, one of your colleagues, Dr. Burgess, has COVID now, Congressman Louis Gohmert. Congresswoman Kay Granger is quarantining because she was on a flight with him. Have you been around Congressman Gohmert, and are you quarantining as well?
Short answer to both questions is no.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're doing well. I want to ask about a tweet that the president sent the other day. The president sends a lot of tweets, as we all know, but he suggested that the November election should be delayed, possibly. That's something that only Congress can do. Would you support that, Congressman?
No, not at this time. Look, this country has voted through all kinds of turmoil and trouble in the past. The country was able to vote during the Civil War, able to vote through two world wars, a previous pandemic. I think right now, I've not seen the evidence that would support a delay, but it is that written into the Constitution, it is up to the Congress to do that.
What are your thoughts on that? When you saw that tweet, what were your thoughts on that? I'm surprised that there aren't. We did see quite a few Republicans say, heck no, we're not doing this. No, sir, it's not going to happen. What were your thoughts as a member of his own party when he sent that out?
Look, Jason, here might be a little bit of a surprise to you. I don't sit around all day watching the computer screen to see what's going to come across. I was pretty busy during the end of the week. A lot of things going on. Deeply involved with Operation Warp Speed right now, and that's pretty much attracted or commanded all of my attention. You just simply cannot react to everything that occurs in the news cycle the way some people would like for you to.
Well, last question, less than 60 seconds here. A bunch of mayors from across the state of Texas have sent the congressional delegation a letter saying we need money to balance our budgets. What is your response to them? Will they get money to help balance their budgets, which they have to do?
Well, the truth is they've already in the bill that passed on the 27th of March, there was money identified for cities, counties, and states to help offset the difficulties encountered by the pandemic. The problem is that money has not been completely expended yet, and there's still, I think, a $50 billion that remains. So we need to work through whatever the problems have been getting that money to where it has needed before simply pushing more money out the door. We need to find out why the money has not gotten to where it was intended. And that has been the problem both in Texas and other states. And some states just simply aren't even attempting to use the money. Right. So I don't see how adding additional dollars would be of assistance. All
right, Congressman Michael Burgess, we appreciate the time as always.
Great, thank you.
You know, it looks like that wearing face masks might be making a difference in the fight against coronavirus across the state. July was the worst month yet for the virus in Texas, but new cases are now trending down a little bit for August. That's the good news. The bad news is deaths have increased. That might be because Texas is changing the way it counts COVID-19 deaths. We're going to dig into this morning with Ross Ramsey, the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune. Good morning to you, Ross.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
You're doing well. You know, perhaps one of the biggest takeaways from the state's numbers is the pandemic's toll on Hispanics.
Yeah, the number or the percentage of Hispanic deaths among the death toll is around 47%. That's higher than the number of Hispanics in the general population, about 40%. And it indicates that this is harder on those communities right now. It's showing up in the statistics. It has showed up in other states. We're just seeing it in Texas now.
And did the change in how we're counting deaths, is that going to increase or decrease deaths? Any idea how the trend's going to go on that?
It increased the number of deaths. You know, there was one day when they first did it that increased the number of deaths by 600. What they're doing is instead of collecting statistics from local health departments, they're counting death certificates, which also include the cause of death on them. And when they started doing that, they found that the numbers they've been using were too low.
I want to ask you lastly about UT Austin. Last week we talked about how they're going to have 50% of people in the stands. This week they're reconsidering that. Does anyone really expect people in the stands come this fall?
I don't know. I don't think we're going to expect 50% now. You know, the chancellor or the head of the Board of Regents, Kevin Eltife, former state senator from Tyler, came in and said, why don't you lower that to 25 and let's see what that looks like. I don't think anybody's even sure they're going to play football yet. But if they do, it'll be something less than 50% of the stands full.
Gotcha. Ross, back to you in a moment. Thank you. Coming up next on our program here, a COVID vaccine likely closer than you think. We had a lot of questions for Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar during his visit to Dallas. And West Texas has gone from boom to bust in the last few months. We'll ask the Energy Secretary about his plan to get Texans back to work there in the oil patch. If money talks, then it's telling quite a story in Texas this year. On this episode of Y'all-itics, we look at all the cash that Democrats are collecting right now. They're outraising Republicans, and all of it raises a question. Can all that green turn Texas blue this year? We make it very easy for you this week to find our latest episode of this podcast. Grab your mobile phone if it's handy there, turn on the camera and point it here at the QR code on your screen. It's going to open a window that takes you to this new episode of our Y'all-itics Political Podcast. And remember that we drop new episodes every Tuesday. Now to the pandemic and some encouraging news that could reshape politics this fall. A vaccine for COVID is coming sooner than you think. That's what Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar told us. This is an exclusive interview that we did while socially distancing outside under a couple of tents and a rain cloud. Mr. Secretary, thanks for the time.
Glad to be here.
I want to ask about vaccines. There's a vaccine by Moderna that's entering phase 3 clinical trial. That's pretty significant. I'm curious how soon you think a vaccine might be available.
Well, you're right. It's historic. The Moderna vaccine, which was originally invented out of NIH, entered phase 3 clinical trials. That's the final dispositive phase, just 4 months after phase 1. That's not happened before in human history, as far as we can tell, in the developed world. So an incredible achievement. And now Pfizer has also launched phase 3 with their vaccine. So that's 2 of the 5 vaccines that we have announced contracts, investments, or partnerships with as part of the President's Operation Warp Speed are already now in the final stages of trials. So the way this will work is they have to get an initial vaccine, and then about 3 to 4 weeks later, people will get the second vaccine, and then we have to collect data to see if the vaccine is proving, in those who got the vaccine, is proving to give them protection. So it will be a couple of months at least until we start seeing some data coming in on these, but we're not waiting.
Could a vaccine be available this year?
Yes. It is very credible that we could have the high tens of millions of doses of FDA authorized or approved vaccine this year.
There's been a lot of talk about how much a vaccine would cost. The U.S. is spending a lot of money with Operation Warp Speed to give to these companies. Should the vaccine be free to American citizens?
So with many of these contracts, we actually will own the vaccine, and as the owner of it, we'll be giving it to the American people for free. So for instance, the terms of the Pfizer contract provide that we will actually acquire 100 million doses of vaccine that will be given to the American people. We continue to negotiate with the different vaccine companies, contractual provisions, but we have made the commitment that the COVID vaccine will either be free or certainly affordable for all Americans. Their cost will not be a barrier to any American having access to an approved COVID vaccine.
I want to talk about contact tracing for a moment. The CDC says it's vital to really slowing the spread, stopping the spread. But there are states like Texas, like Florida, like Massachusetts that just are understaffed and unprepared when it comes to that. What are these states doing wrong?
Well, they're not doing something wrong, but what it is, when you have this level of community spread, when you're having 17% positivity on the testing that you are doing, the traditional tools of contact tracing are not really what's going to get this under control at this point. What we need now are what we call community mitigation efforts. That's why it is so critical now that we wear our face coverings, that we practice social distancing, that we shut the bars down, which are settings where we know we're just not going to be socially distant or wearing face coverings. If we take these measures, we see an impact. We've seen this in Phoenix. Simply, face coverings plus shutting the bars down has turned the tide in Phoenix, and we're seeing signs of that here in Texas.
Mr. Secretary, I want to talk about a big story here in Texas. There's a worldwide race for the vaccine. I'm curious about the Chinese consulate in Houston. Were they trying to steal vaccine research from institutions? Is that why the consulate was closed down there?
I don't know about that. I'd have to refer you to Secretary Pompeo. Obviously, we're very concerned about other countries attempting either to steal or to sabotage the vaccine and other Operation Warp Speed efforts. I personally don't know about the connection to the consulate issues, and I don't want to make any statements regarding any particular country that might be involved.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for the time.
Great, thanks. Good to be with you.
And now to the West Texas and the oil patch there. Fewer people are driving and flying places right now. That means less demand for fuel and fewer jobs there in the Permian Basin. Secretary of Energy Dan Brule flew to Midland with the president last week, and he is our next guest this morning. Mr. Secretary, thanks for the time.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
The price of oil has dropped. The rig count in the Permian Basin is down substantially. What is the administration's plan to get Texans back to work?
Well, I think the plan involves an economic recovery that's going to span the country. That's what's going to drive the production of oil and gas back up in America. Any
indication right now at all when we might see a pickup in new construction, new exploration as well?
Well, we're already seeing a pickup in the demand curves for refined product like gasoline, some diesel, also some jet fuel, as people are beginning to travel a little bit more than they have over the course of the last few weeks and months. So that's going to drive some of this increased production. We're also seeing some merger and acquisition activity all across Texas and also other parts of the country. Those are all leading indicators of a strong economic recovery, which we expect to start in the third and fourth quarter of this year, as well as into early 21, first and second quarter.
Well, tell me how that would happen, because everything I've seen, Mr. Secretary, says you have to have a vaccine first before people are comfortable coming back out and kind of resuming the way things were?
Well, I think it depends on the individual. I mean, some people are already out and about, and I think, for instance, we're seeing economic activity increase in Texas. We're seeing it down where I used to live for a very long time in San Antonio. I was just down there visiting the Air Force Cyber Command. Anecdotally, you look around, restaurants are opening, they're taking precautions, but they are open, and you're starting to see that economic activity return. And I think we're going to continue to see that for the remainder of this year.
And Mr. Secretary, storage is obviously kind of a big deal too, because it puts people to work as well if they can still, pull oil out of the ground and at least store it. But I want to ask about the Strategic Petroleum Reserves. The U.S. is also renting out space there to India and to Australia. How important is that, and do we have room for that?
That's correct. A very unique program that we instituted here at the Department of Energy. Back when the demand curve fell off the edge of the table, when the economies began to shut down, the demand curves always move faster than the production curves. And what happened was production continued for a period of time, which created an acute shortage of storage for this oil that was being produced and not consumed. The president directed me to open up the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which I did immediately. And we took in millions of barrels of oil and stored it in Louisiana and Texas. And that program is still ongoing, but also as part of this program, Australia, a very close ally to the United States, asked for permission to store some oil in the Strategic Reserve as well. We did a deal with them by which they purchased American oil to store in our reserve, and we're going to do the same thing with India very shortly.
All right, Mr. Secretary, thanks for the time.
Thank you, Jason. Great to be with you.
The secretary there flew to West Texas with the president last week. Trump needed to shore up support here, but can rural voters carry him over the top in this state? That's one of our topics coming up next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross is back. Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram is here each week. And of course, Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas, joins us as well. Ross, will start with you, though. President Trump returned to Texas out in the Permian Basin a few days ago. It seems like he's spending a lot of time in Texas, considering we're less than 100 days out as well. Is he that concerned about these polls showing that Joe Biden's neck and neck with him?
I think they're concerned about the polls, but, I think the main thing to consider here is that Texas is an ATM state. It's one of the states where candidates from both parties come to get money for the campaign. My understanding is their preliminary count was he got $7 million for that stop in Lubbock. It's pretty good. That's a pretty good stop.
Yeah, it is indeed so, Bud. $7 million out there. That's where a lot of money is, of course. But how important are those rural West Texas voters to the Trump campaign, just like they were to Ted Cruz?
This is where Ted Cruz beat Beto a couple of years ago. Ted Cruz shored up the Panhandle, West Texas. Beto thought he could get 30 or 35% of those counties. He only got 20%. Those counties are going to be solid red. But, even if Trump loses 5%, if he performs 5% worse than Cruz, that means he's close to losing.
Bernadine?
That's true. And those candidates are going to be very important to the Trump campaign. And as Ross indicated, Texas is considered an ATM state. However, he is spending a lot of time once he gets into the state, because if he loses Texas, he loses the presidential election. And it is not as typical for a candidate to spend as much time, even if they are raising money, as he's spending in this state.
Yeah, it seems like he's been here a lot, just
Yes.
compared to other years. Ross, I want to ask you about the Attorney General Paxton, his legal opinion on public schools. He's essentially tied money to the opening of schools and said if you don't open within the first 8 weeks, then you don't get state funding. Does that help or hurt him with Republicans in the suburbs?
I think they're fine. They've got enough wiggle room on this that the local school superintendents still have the power to open or close these things to in-person classes, which is kind of what we're talking about. What the ruling looks like it says is that if you don't open to in-person classes within 8 weeks after you start, then your state funding could be in jeopardy. But when you start is a completely local decision. So we'll see how it goes.
Bud?
Well, it looks like that it's a very positive. I mean, the happy people are the parents in Collin County, Northeast Tarrant County, Parker County. The conservative people wanted schools to get up and open. Aledo parents, 80% wanted schools to get up and open. So those parents are very happy with Ken Paxton. Everybody's dividing up into the red jerseys and the blue jerseys right now, Jason.
Yeah.
And, the red jerseys want school to start.
Bernadine, final word.
I think parents just want their kids to be safe when they do return. And I think that at this point, it is left up to local districts. And I don't think anybody at this point is going to suffer politically. It's just what's going to happen once those schools open.
Yeah. All right, guys, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Thank you for watching as well. We're back again next Sunday with another episode of Inside Texas Politics. Hope to see you then. Take care.